What's happening, folks? It's your pal DK from Tactical Snacking with DK, here for Tacky Snack Reacts, where we watch food videos off of YouTube and react to them. Hopefully some good information, maybe some bad information, who knows. Regardless, we're going to have ourselves a good time. So today's video was sent to me by Maria, somebody that I've gotten to know on Twitch, and has sent me this link for Spanakopita, specifically with phyllo dough that's been made by hand. Phyllo dough, a Greek dough, traditionally is very thin sheets layered up to make all sorts of different Greek pastries. In this particular case, it's being made by hand and rolled out by hand. So we're going to watch this video and maybe learn a thing or two. All right, let's check it out.
Hi guys, Yasas, que Carlos to another episode of Dimitra's Dishes. Today we're making Spanakopita with a homemade phyllo dough. This is known as a Horiatiki dough in Greece. It's basically like a village style, very hearty and rustic pastry dough that is so easy to make. I think it has like 4 or 5 very basic ingredients and it tastes so delicious. Everyone who's had it while I was recipe testing this past week said that this was the best Spanakopita they've ever had. It's delicious. I think you guys are going to love it. Let's get started. We're going to get started with making the dough, and you can do this a day ahead of time and just let it rest in the refrigerator. You're going to have to let it rest on the counter for about an hour or two so it can be nice and elastic and soft. So the ingredients are super simple. It's 500 grams of all-purpose flour. Now 500 grams is about 3.5 cups or so, 3 to 4 cups. It's about that much. A heaping teaspoon of salt.
So I'm a big fan when it comes to baking and stuff like that of weight measures as opposed to volume measures. In this case, she mentioned 500 grams and then 3.5 cups. If you have the opportunity to go with a standardized weight, definitely go with a standardized weight, since that's going to be a much more accurate measure than volume. When you're measuring flour volume, for instance, they've found that the scoop and sweep method, where you scoop up the flour and then sweep it off with like the back of a knife or something like that, can vary pretty wildly in how much is actually in the measuring cup. So if you can measure it by weight, it's going to be way more accurate and way more repeatable. And repeatability is really what you want for stuff like this. As for the salt, she just said a heaping teaspoon. How much is that? I don't know.
Just mix everything all up. And it's going to go in the mixing bowl. Everything goes in the mixing bowl together. Now, you don't need a mixing bowl for this. You can definitely knead this by hand. I like to use one because it makes life super simple. We're going to add a cup, or I think it's 250 mLs of warm water.
Okay. This is a slight pet peeve of mine. She's taking water out of a liquid measuring cup and pouring it into a dry measuring cup. A liquid versus a dry measure is actually, there's a bit of difference to it, and so stuff like that, it's something that just kind of bugs me, and it's a slight red flag. For just, yeah, it's kind of a pet peeve. Like I said, if you're measuring out liquids, use a liquid measuring cup. If you're measuring out dry ingredients, use a dry measuring cup. Just, if you do that, you'll be able to have the same results every time, which is really kind of what you want when you're baking.
You want to make sure the water is warm, not cold. A teaspoon of vinegar helps keep it really nice and tender. And 2 tablespoons of really good quality olive oil. That's it. We're just going to knead this until the dough comes together and it's nice and elastic, smooth and soft. It's just going to take a few minutes. You don't have to knead this for that long. If you see that it's kind of dry and crumbly, you can go in and add about a tablespoon of water at a time, just until it comes together. You don't want it to be sticky. So I said not to make it sticky, and then what did I do? I went ahead and I made it sticky, but I'm going to show you it because you can still fix it.
Slight red flag here. She's got a ring on. Don't ever have your rings on. Not when you're cooking. It's bad sanitation, it's bad practice. Do not do it. This is a bit of a red flag for me. I get a little concerned when I see stuff like this. It's pretty basic food safety stuff.
Two tablespoons of water would have been enough, but I went ahead and added a few more, and then it did get a little bit too sticky, but you can just roll it out lightly and knead it on a work surface.
I get very concerned, and I'm cringing watching this with a ring.
With just a little bit of flour, and that fixes the problem. You could roll it into a log. Perfect. No big deal. Cut it in half, and then you need 8 portions.
It's great for snacking. Fits on your back. Log, log, log.
As equal as possible. And then you're just going to roll each one into a ball. You could do it on the counter, but if the counter has a lot of flour on it, it'll be hard to roll. You can see how these are not very equal. It'll still be fine. Each one of these are going to get rolled out into a layer of phyllo, and it doesn't matter if one is a little slightly bigger than the other. We are not selling these. We are not opening up a phyllo factory, so it will be fine. And you can just let these rest on your countertop just like this, covered with a towel or with plastic wrap. I'm just gonna need this area to make the filling, so I'm gonna store them or let them rest in this bowl over here. Just sprinkle a little bit of flour inside of it and go ahead and put all of the dough in there.
Pretty sure she's flexing with that copper measuring cup.
And I'm just gonna cover it with some plastic wrap and set it aside for at least 30-40 minutes. The longer you leave it, the easier they are going to be to roll out. So 1 to 2 hours is preferable. You could also leave this in your refrigerator overnight and just work with it the next day.
The rising and sort of proofing on the counter for a couple of hours versus overnight, there is going to be a difference. The slower rising fermentation that takes place in a fridge overnight yields usually a better flavor, but depending on what it is that you're making, it may or may not be an appreciable difference. So if you're making things for, like, say, a party or something like that, I would absolutely make the dough ahead of time, rush the day of.
I'm going to clean up, and then we're going to make the spinach pie filling. Okay, so the Spanakopita filling is the same one that I've been using for the past, 15 years. It's delicious. You don't have to pre-cook the spinach or anything.
Okay, she said you don't have to pre-cook the spinach. That's a big bowl of spinach. When cooked, that spinach will reduce quite a bit and release a lot of liquid. I guarantee you, when she goes to bake this, that there's going to be a lot of liquid. That's why you pre-cook your spinach before you put it into anything like a quiche, frittata, anything like that. So then that way it doesn't release all this excess liquid into whatever it is that you're making. So I don't anticipate this going well. I'm just saying.
Any of the herbs taste so fresh and good and so easy to make. And I found that if you have a KitchenAid mixer, it'll do all the work for you. Otherwise, just finely chop the spinach and mix everything in a big bowl until it all comes together. I don't even chop my spinach anymore. That's how easy this version is.
So, interesting side note. Maria, who sent me the video, said that nobody uses a KitchenAid. My guess is this woman lives here in the United States as opposed to Greece. But hey, if it works for you, it works for you.
So I'm going to put a little bit of the spinach in, not all of it, maybe that much. Some of the dill, I'm using dry dill. If you're using fresh dill, you're going to need about a bunch of it. That's like about a quarter cup of...
A bunch of dill. A bunch apparently is a quarter cup. Interesting. So, doing conversion factor in my head, and I'm thinking, okay, so what's a butt ton then? Is that like 3 bunches? 4 bunches? I don't know. The other thing is the dill is, from what I understand, a hotly contested item. I also find it fascinating that she talks about how it's so fresh and everything else, but she's using dried dill. Okay.
Finely chopped dill. Otherwise, the measurement is, I believe, 2 or 3 tablespoons. The exact measurements are on the recipe on the blog post. I'm going to add the scallions. I just roughly chopped 6 scallions And then I just dunk them in a bowl of cold water. So if there's any dirt inside of them, it'll sink down to the bottom. Lift them out, put them in a strainer, get rid of that excess water, and then they're nice and clean. If the water is extra, dirty, or if you see a lot of sediment down at the bottom of the water, give it a few rinses, but never pour the water with the scallions through the strainer. Otherwise, everything that comes out that's stuck inside of them, all that dirt, is just gonna end up right back on them, right?
Okay, I understand the soaking of the scallions in order to get rid of any potential dirt that's on the inside of them. I get that. I get her logic for not pouring the water through them because then the dirt has the potential to stick to the outside of it. My question is, though, why wouldn't you pour them through the strainer at the sink and then use a vegetable sprayer to give them a quick rinse?
Okay, then this is a container or 15 ounces of full-fat whole milk ricotta cheese. If you can't find it, you can just leave it out and put extra feta cheese in there. You can use an equal amount of cream cheese or even mascarpone cheese.
I will say that a comment that I got from Maria about this was that the use of ricotta or mascarpone or cream cheese, not so much. It's usually made with straight up feta. I can see how the use of mascarpone or ricotta or whatever could be good in this. I'm not personally a huge fan of ricotta, so I would probably go the cream cheese or mascarpone route, maybe even Neufchâtel, but I'm not Greek, so.
I've done this with all of those substitutes, and it comes out delicious each and every time. But the ricotta is what my mom uses. This is how she taught me, so I use this as often as I can get ricotta cheese. And then I'm going to add some freshly cracked black pepper, about half a teaspoon or so, or as much as you like. Just a little bit of salt, about half a teaspoon. Feta cheese tends to be pretty salty, and we are going to add that in later on, so you don't want this to get too salty. And then 3 eggs. If I'm in a real big hurry, I end up cracking them into the bowl, and I always regret it because sometimes you get a shell in there and then you can't even fish it out. So just use the ricotta container or something that's already dirty so you don't dirty one more thing, and put them in the mixer. I'm going to start mixing this on medium-low speed. And then as it's mixing, I'm just going to keep adding the spinach in a little bit at a time until it's all incorporated in there. It's going to break down and everything is going to fit in the mixer.
If you watch her mixer head, you see how it's kind of bouncing up and down. Before she started it, you could hear like a little clang, and it sounded like she was trying to engage the lock, but the head wasn't all the way down, so it didn't actually lock into place. When you watch this, you can see the head of the mixer moving up and down, and this is precisely why you want to lock it, so that it doesn't do that. Oh, yep, see, there it goes.
And then the final ingredient, once everything is mixed in, you see how everything fits, you're going to need a pound of feta cheese. Always buy it in block form and just crumble it in yourself. If you buy the crumbles, I feel like I've said this so many times, they're too salty, not good quality. You just don't want them. Get a block of feta cheese and crumble it. It just takes a few seconds. And you don't want to add this at the beginning because then it pretty much melts into everything and you're not going to get little pieces of feta in each bite, which tastes so good in Spanakopita. And just mix it until it all comes together. Just give it a nice mix with a spatula, so if there's anything stuck to the bottom, it's just all well incorporated. So I'm just gonna tidy up a little bit and then we're gonna put the spinach pie together. Okay, so I realized that I forgot to add the olive oil to the filling. I'm gonna add 2-3 tablespoons is really all you need. I always eyeball it and then just mix it all up. So I'm using this big pan because it's very traditional to use big round pans to make spinach pies. I found it in a local Mediterranean specialty food store. Let's see how big it is. It's 13 inches or 33 centimeters. If you don't have one, I know these are hard to find. You don't have to use one of these. It's not mandatory. You can use a 10-inch round deep dish pie pan. This works. It's going to be a thicker pie, and who doesn't like thicker pies? That's delicious. Or you could use a 9 by 13-inch baking dish. Either of these you can use. Okay, so I just moved the cutting board out of the way because I like to have a big surface to roll these out on. So the dough has rested for a few hours. I made this one in the morning, and it's nice and soft, and it should roll out very easily. I'm just going to take one at a time, and I'm just going to press it all around so I can get it as round as possible. And I'm going to lightly flour the area, lightly flour the dough. And to get it as round as possible, just each time you roll, just keep turning it. And you're going to roll this out as big as you can without it tearing. It might get 1 or 2 tears in it. It shouldn't, but if it does, it's not a big deal. I'm thinking about 13 to 14 inches round is what you're looking for. The thinner it gets, the lighter the crust will be. If you like a thicker crust, I guess roll it out to about 10 to 12 inches round. That should be good. But it should be bigger than the pan that you're using, so it can extend a little bit out. And if it starts to stick, just sprinkle some more flour and do that on both sides. Just try not to use too much flour. And then you can start rolling it on the rolling pin and just pressing it while you're rolling. It's going to help it stretch out a little bit bigger. Let's see where we're at. We're at 13 inches, and this is looking good enough to me for this one. You see it's a little bit see-through. It hasn't torn. It's a little tiny tear over here, but that is fine. The dough should be nice and elastic. So we're going to take the first layer, and we're going to put most of it inside the pan, and I'm going to let a little bit hang outside of the edges. This is going to help make a really nice crust. So I'm going to drizzle some olive oil on top and brush it. Now, if you want to use melted butter, if you like the flavor of butter better, you can do that. But this is traditional. This is how it's made in Greece. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue rolling out all of these layers. I'm going to layer first 4 layers of phyllo on the bottom. And then we're going to move on to the next step. But I think I'm just going to roll all of these out first so that way they're ready. And then we're going to put it all together.
I'm kind of curious. When she laid out the first layer of dough, if you notice, she didn't press it into the side. She let it kind of drape down. I would think that when you make this that you would want to press it up against the side just so then that way there's no gaps or anything like that. But who knows, we'll see.
All right, so now that the sheets are formed, we're going to continue to just put this all together. And I'm just going to layer the sheets all around the pan with some of the phyllo just extending outside of the pan, drizzling some olive oil right on top.
So a little pro tip, I would have put olive oil into a separate like custard cup or something like that, and then brushed it on from there, as opposed to constantly having to pick up the bottle over and over and over again. One of the things that I learned back in school was when I was working with phyllo dough, that if you use too much butter, olive oil, whatever, that it has a tendency to kind of get a little gummy. And so it's best to show restraint when it comes to lubing up the individual layers of dough and everything else. Yeah, I'm kind of curious what the bottom will look like when it's all said and done. Again, not pressing up against the sides, and it's just kind of, just thrown in there a little willy-nilly. I don't know. It stuff like that kind of makes me twinge just a little bit. Just it's my personality, I guess. But I guess we'll see.
And then we're going to add all of the filling right into the pan over the phyllo.
So watery.
It smells so fresh and so good. And just go ahead and spread it out into an even layer. This smells like my childhood. Okay, then we're just going to fold over all of the pieces of phyllo that are extended outside of the pan, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to drizzle olive oil right over each one of the layers. And then the remaining 4 layers are going to get layered over top. If you want to, you can ruffle them on top the way I do my ruffled phyllo top with the store-bought phyllo. But I'm just going to do layers like this. So if you're going to ruffle them, this is what you're going to do. You're just going to take a sheet at a time, and you're just going to gather it like that, and then just place it on top. But I like it better this way.
Folds are bugging me. That big fold bugging me.
And now we're just going to cut it into portions. You can do the portions as big or as small as you want them.
Now that's interesting. Pre-cutting it before baking. Not seen that before.
I like to do some diagonals, so let's go this way. And I have black sesame seeds. If you want to sprinkle white sesame seeds on top, you could, or you could leave it without any sesame seeds at all. I think they just add a little nice, pretty touch, so I'm just going to add them.
Black sesame seeds also tend to be a little bit sweeter than white sesame seeds.
Okay, so my oven is preheated to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. This is going to go in and bake on the center rack for 40 minutes. Then I'm going to raise the temperature to 400 degrees Fahrenheit and let this bake for another 20 or 25 minutes or until it's nice and golden on top. I start with a lower temperature because I want it to cook through nice and evenly. Each one of those layers, I want them to get perfectly cooked, and the top ones and the bottom, I want them to be nice and crispy. So keep an eye on it because every oven bakes differently. I'll show you what it looks like as soon as it's done.
Prediction time. I guarantee you it took longer than what she said. I guarantee it. Because of the liquid in that spinach, I guarantee you it took longer than the time that she said that it was going to take. The other thing that I would say is her logic for the way that she's baking it makes total sense. It's a good, solid plan of action. That when you have something kind of big and thick like that, starting it off at a lower temperature, so then that way the heat's more gently moving through whatever it is that you're making, in this case a spinach pie, but like say turkey or something like that, starting it off on a lower temperature, so then that way you're not overcooking the outside and completely undercooking the inside, and then at the very end cranking up the heat to really brown it up. It's what's also known as a reverse sear technique for like steaks and everything, where you start it out in kind of a low temp oven and then do a final sear at the very end, thus reverse sear, as opposed to searing it first and then turning the temp down. In this particular case, I think she chose wisely with what she did.
The Spanakopita is finally ready, and the house smells incredibly delicious. Making me so hungry. Once it comes out of the oven, let it cool for at least 15-20 minutes, so that way it is easy to slice and it won't fall apart. I should have waited a little bit longer, but I had to wrap up this video. Let me tell you that this did take a little bit over an hour. It took about an hour and 20 minutes because the spinach did release a lot of juices. And as a matter of fact, if you want to lay a layer of breadcrumbs on the bottom of the pan, just so that way the bottom can be a little bit crispier, that might be a good idea.
Or you could
Some
just
people don't
blanch
like the
your spinach
texture of
first.
the breadcrumbs, so in that case, what I would do is for the last about 10 minutes, I would move the pie to the bottom of the oven and turn the bottom heat on if your oven is able to do that. If your oven bakes from the bottom like mine does, then the bottom rack will be fine. Just don't start it off on the bottom because it'll burn. So for the final 10 minutes, that should give it enough time to crisp up. This is just going to be a juicy pie because the spinach and the herbs are not cooked ahead of time, and we love it that way.
Except
it's just
the dill
so
was
fresh
dried.
and good. It is time to take a bite. Once it cools though, just make sure that you cut through it again, you know, where you scored it ahead of time. The top should be super crispy. The bottom might not be that crispy. Again, like I said, once it cools, the juices are going to be absorbed, and you could actually put it in the oven for another 10 minutes if you want the bottom crust to be just as crispy as the top. That is an option. It is time for the taste test.
The soggy bottom pie.
One of my favorite things, this is how my mom always made it. She always made her own phyllo dough, and she still does most of the time. It's rustic and a little thicker than the regular phyllo that's sold in the grocery store.
I just noticed something. So I actually have a degree in photography, and I just noticed that the framing of the video isn't totally level. Because if you look at, let's see, where this line right here, you can see that, so these cabinets should be completely lined up. They should be like the exact same level. The distance here versus the distance here, it's like slightly tilted. Sorry, I just saw that. And I mean, it's a dumb thing, but I just noticed it and it made me kind of laugh.
I think it tastes better. It's heartier. That filling is...
Right.
My mom always made it. She always made her own phyllo dough, and she still does most of the time. It's rustic and a little thicker than the regular phyllo that's sold in the grocery store. I think it tastes better. It's heartier. That filling is the best. I think you'll agree with me if you give it a try and you compare it to fillings that are made with spinach that has been already cooked. The exact measurements are on the website. If you want to learn how to make the spinach pie that's made with the store-bought phyllo, you're going to click over here and I'll see you right over there. Yes, Saz.
Okay, so that was Spanakopita, and it was interesting. I can't say that I would make it the exact same way with the raw spinach because, like I said, with the liquid leaching out and everything else, I would personally blanch it quickly and then squeeze it out to get rid of any of that excess liquid before chopping it up and mixing it up into the rest of the filling to go into it. The dough recipe, on the other hand, actually looks really interesting, and I want to give it a try, and I think I'll do that on stream sometime, just because, like I said, it sounds good, and like I said, I won't be basting it quite as much as she did. Personally, from the times that I have worked with phyllo dough, the less that you use in terms of lubrication between layers, the better. So then that way things get really nice and crispy and don't get gummy. So, thanks for watching, everybody. Hopefully, this was something that you enjoyed. If you did, please, if you would be so kind, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications. I know everybody says that, but it actually does help people like me, because what that does is tell the almighty algorithm that people are actually engaged and people are liking it. And the more people that like, that subscribe, etc., the more likely the algorithm will recommend videos like this to other people. So then that way more people can get enjoyment out of this. So anyways, hope you guys have a wonderful day. Take care, and I will see you next video.